Shall we begin?
Sure. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many faces and familiar names in the participants list. Welcome to this webinar presented by HERA, the Heritage Emergency Response Alliance. My name is Christine Wiseman. I'm one of the co-chairs of HERA and one of the founding members. I'm just going to provide a very quick introduction and then turn it over to all the excellent speakers. HERA is Atlanta's cooperative disaster network. We've been in business, so to speak, since 2007 after Alliance for Response that was held in Atlanta. We are a network of conservators, curators, librarians, archivists, emergency responders, and preservation administrators interested in protecting cultural heritage around Atlanta and around the state. We coordinate with GMA on statewide response. And we work, of course, with all of the other institutions in the Atlanta area to help each other and support each other in the event of a disaster. We do training programs. This is our annual training program right now. We do usually about one a year in conjunction with May Day. So we're just a little late on that, but it's still May. So, and we're pleased to have everybody able to join us. You see our link. We have a website, a listserv, and we are on Facebook. And if you'd like to join HERA, please look at our WordPress website, and there's a form you can fill out to join the organization. You don't have to be in Georgia to join. So please do that. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Todd Lampkin. He is from Emory at the Carlos Museum, and he is our education chair.
Hi there. Hi, welcome. Yep. So I'm Todd Lampkin. So today we're going to be hearing from 3 speakers, each describing their involvement with projects preparing for and responding to disasters affecting the cultural heritage preservation world, using things like GIS, linked open data to protect cultural resources, and remote access tools to continue to serve customer communities during the pandemic. Our first speaker will be Lori Foley. She's the administrator of the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, a public-private partnership between FEMA's Office of Environmental Planning and Historic Preservation and the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative. Working at the intersection of cultural heritage and emergency management, Lori coordinates collaboration and information sharing between these 2 communities to protect the nation's cultural heritage. Lori's talk is entitled The Heritage Emergency National Task Force, Helping States Map Their Cultural Institutions and Arts Organizations. Next, we're going to hear from Cliff Landis with his talk, and forgive me, Cliff, Georgia Inch, is that how you say it? Using linked open data for Georgia's natural, cultural, and historic organizations' disaster response. Cliff is Digital Initiatives Librarian at the Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodruff Library. His research interests include linked open data, archival technologies, digitization, metadata, and the coevolution of humanity and technology. Finally, we'll hear from Angela Stanley, who is Director of Georgia Home Place for the Georgia Public Library Service. Angela works with the state's 62 public library systems to cultivate digitization initiatives, support archival and special collections management, and coordinate emergency preparedness training and resources. Her talk is entitled Prepared to Respond, Georgia's Public Libraries and the COVID-19 Pandemic. Please join me in welcoming all of our speakers. So just for process, if you have questions or comments, if you want to submit those in the chat panel, as I mentioned at the beginning, I will gather those up and then put them together for the speakers in the Q&A session at the end of the talk. And after that, I will hand off to Lori.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks, Christine. Let's see if I can get my screen to share. Share. Do you see that by any chance? All right, let's see. Slideshow. Whoops. Out of my way, slideshow. Okay, let me see now. Let me just bail out of this just for a second. I am going to make myself not be visible because you don't want to see me. You want to look at the slides. So let's try that again. Take two. Screen share. This one. Share. All right, let's see. You see my, let's go again. There we go. Okay. So I'm really honored to be part of this webinar, and HERA is near and dear to my heart because I've worked with so many of you over the years, and I was privileged to coordinate the Alliance for a Response initiative when I was at Heritage Preservation. So this afternoon, I'm going to speak briefly about the efforts by the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, or HENTF, to nudge and push and cajole states to create an inventory of their cultural, historic, and arts organizations. And there's really nothing innovative in what HENTF is espousing, which is simply determining the universe of cultural and historic institutions and arts organizations in a state before a disaster occurs. But the challenge we face at the national level is getting states to create, and almost equally important, to maintain this inventory. So when, not if, a disaster occurs, precious days and often weeks aren't lost trying to determine the damage suffered by an unknown quantity of organizations in the arts, culture, and historic sector. And since that's a mouthful, I'll be referring to this sector as simply the cultural heritage sector. And disasters do not always rise to the level of federal engagement. So having this information available to assist local and state governments is really crucial. And FEMA's approach to a major disaster is this: response to a major disaster is locally executed, state managed, and federally supported. HENTF is a public-private partnership sponsored by FEMA's Office of Environmental Planning and Historic Preservation and the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative. Following major disaster declarations, HENTF plays a role in supporting states by providing response and recovery support to the cultural heritage community to mitigate the damaging effects of natural disasters and other emergencies. And this is where HENTF sits, way at the bottom, under the Department of Homeland Security org chart. FEMA is one of 7 agencies under the jurisdiction of DHS, and you probably recognize the acronyms of our sister agencies. So the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Customs and Border Patrol, U.S. Coast Guard, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Transportation Security Administration, and the U.S. Secret Service. A few years ago, a resilience organization was formed at FEMA that comprised 2 directorates, the National Continuity Programs, and an administration referred to as the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration, or FEMA. And within FEMA are 4 directorates and 1 office. And the 1 office is the Office of Environmental Planning and Historic Preservation. And within that office are 3 branches, of which 1 is readiness. And within the readiness branch are 3 sections, of which 1 is the incident support and doctrine section. And that is where HENTF resides. It's a lot of depth in terms of way far from the top. And one of the challenges that HENTF has is ensuring that there is visibility, not so much of HENTF, but in the work that we do in supporting cultural institutions and arts organizations. These are HENTF's objectives. 3 of the 5 objectives focus on partnerships and collaboration between the cultural heritage and emergency management communities. 1 objective focuses on incorporating cultural and historic resources into planning efforts. And 1 objective aligns with FEMA's individual assistance program and HENTF's ability to provide guidance to disaster survivors on how they can save their treasured family belongings. The 1 objective that I'll be focusing on today is the first one: coordinating the collection and sharing of incident-specific information. And this list shows HENTF's 58 members. The 18 federal agencies at the top in red are, let's see, yep, there are 18 of them, and the 40 national service organizations are in black. So what qualities establish membership? Each member has a network of stakeholders or members themselves and the ability to push information out to those constituents. And conversely, each has the ability to gather information, such as reports of damage, from their members and pass them along to HENTF. There are 5 national planning frameworks, one for each mission area. So prevention, protection, response, recovery, and mitigation. HENTF has a formal role under the National Response Framework, and HENTF supports Emergency Support Function 11, or ESF 11, Agriculture and Natural Resources. HENTF works with both primary agencies, but works most closely with the Department of the Interior, specifically DOI's Office of Environmental Policy and Compliance. ESF 11 is most often activated when disaster operations require specialized cultural heritage and cultural resource support. And I do want to note that HENTF doesn't have to wait for a presidential disaster declaration in order to begin working with the cultural heritage community. We all know that a quick response will prevent or mitigate damage to collections and possibly even prevent the loss of collections. You can see that most of the ESF 11 elements fall under the purview of the Department of Agriculture, but DOI's Office of Environmental Policy and Compliance is charged with the protection of natural and cultural resources and historic properties. As I noted earlier, HENTF coordinates the collection and sharing of incident-specific information. So when there's advance warning of an approaching event, like a hurricane, a heads-up email is sent to the entities listed here. And so in advance of Irma and Florence and Michael and Lane and Olivia and Mancoot and Dorian, HENTF has disseminated hurricane preparedness tips through these channels, and they in turn disseminate tips to their members and constituents. So first to HENTF members, the 58 federal and national service organizations. Within FEMA, my points of contact are the regional environmental officer, the deputy regional environmental officer, and of course leadership in my office. I get in touch with the state cultural agencies, which include, in addition to our usual suspects, the museum, library, and archives state agencies, there are state arts councils, state humanities councils, the State Historic Preservation Office, and state parks. We have state archives, museums, library associations, regional associations, conservation and preservation centers, and the last bullet, local networks. When I speak with emergency managers, I always like to underscore the value of cultural heritage emergency networks. And local networks such as HERA in Atlanta and SHARE in Savannah are so valuable in response and recovery efforts because, as emergency managers are wont to say, all disasters are local. This slide shows a snippet of the master list of North Carolina cultural institutions and arts organizations. Many years ago, North Carolina state cultural agencies, under the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, pooled their lists of museums, libraries, archives, historical societies, and government records offices into one list, and that was under an IMLS grant. With few resources to maintain that list and no more funding to maintain it, the list grew somewhat outdated. But following Hurricane Florence in 2018, HENTF approached the state government-based cultural response team, CREST, which stands for Cultural Resources Emergency Support Team, and asked how we could support the state. And CREST asked for assistance updating the list. And so, Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative's interns, which were obtained through the State Department's Virtual Student Federal Service, the interns updated the list, drawing from data sets furnished by the state itself and by HENTF members as well. And such data sets don't exist across most states. But when responding to an incident, how do we know? How does the county emergency manager know? How do local networks know which institutions have been affected and which ones have not, if we simply don't know what the full universe of institutions is? After Hurricane Dorian struck in 2019, HENTF again reached out to North Carolina, and using the contact lists collected during Hurricane Florence and then updated by the Smithsonian interns following Dorian, The interns staffed a phone bank and called each cultural institution to ascertain their status, asking about the severity and extent of the damage. If an institution stated that they needed phone or on-site assistance, the interns passed along their contact information to CREST, so CREST members could follow up on the ground or on the phone. And this list containing the contacts was turned back over to CREST so the state, and specifically the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, could maintain that list. Following Hurricane Dorian, HENTF worked with my office's Disaster Response Coordinator, DOI's Emergency Support Function 11 National Coordinator, and the U.S. Geological Survey staff to create an interactive public-facing GIS map layer of cultural institutions in the affected states. And clicking on a blue pin, in this case in North Carolina, identifies the institution. This map is going to be helpful in the future for preparedness messaging, because this data layer can be overlaid over other data layers so we know who could be impacted by riverine flooding, storm surge, and so on. And you'll notice that Georgia is missing blue pins. Can you tell here? Not really. More on that soon. In Puerto Rico, the HENTF liaison coordinated a similar cultural database project. And today that list with physical addresses numbers 548 entries: museums, libraries, cultural centers, arts organizations. And that's 548 more entities than we knew about on September 20, 2017, when Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico. So slowly but surely, one state and one territory at a time, we're gaining situational awareness of where cultural institutions are in relation to potential hazards. But we really shouldn't be waiting until a disaster strikes to create these data sets. I've been corresponding with HERA and SHARE since, I look back into my notes, 2016, to find a way to create an inventory of cultural institutions and arts organizations in Georgia. And SHARE had done a great job collecting that information for Savannah. But funding such a project has been a major challenge, and is a major challenge for every state, not just Georgia. Following a major disaster declaration, states are usually given a chunk of money for hazard mitigation statewide. That means that mitigation projects can be funded by FEMA, whether or not a county has been affected by the disaster. But state hazard mitigation officers, SHMOs, S-H-M-O, SHMOs, my favorite acronym, SHMOs are not inclined to fund such an inventory. And despite repeated attempts in Georgia and in other states, the answer has usually been a flat out no. I read recently that the top 5 project types funded by hazard mitigation assistance grants are flood control, acquisitions, utility and infrastructure protection, generators, and safe rooms and wind shelters. Nary a cultural institution or arts organization in sight. And more than a handful of the SHMOs have insisted that creating an inventory is a preparedness activity, not a hazard mitigation activity. And unfortunately, the preparedness grant program offers nothing for cultural private nonprofits except for target hardening and physical enhancements under the nonprofit security grant program. And the other major challenge is finding a state entity willing to maintain that list. In Georgia and in other states, state agencies have said they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the resources, they don't have the staff to maintain such a list. But now, fast forward to 2019, where in Georgia, dogged perseverance and creative problem solving have made a huge difference addressing these challenges. And Cliff will speak more about that in a moment. HENTF has a formal role in recovery as well. It's a supporting organization of the Natural and Cultural Resources Recovery Support Function of the National Disaster Recovery Framework, or the NCR-RSF of the NDRF. And here too, we work closely with the same Department of Interior office, the coordinating agency for this recovery support function. And before I turn the screen back over to Todd, I want to share just one thing that HENTF is doing during the current pandemic crisis in support of NCR-RSF. As we all painfully know, cultural institutions and arts organizations have been severely impacted by the closure of non-essential businesses. And the cultural heritage sector now is faced with addressing, among many unprecedented challenges, the economic impact of sustained closures, canceled revenue-generating events, navigation of stimulus funding, a shift in programming from in-person to online, and the long-term effects of a closed facility on fragile collections that cannot be monitored on a daily basis. HENTEF, with input from its members, published a COVID-19 resource hub, a web portal to multiple resources that can help cultural heritage and creative communities respond to and recover from the pandemic. And this resource hub is being frequently updated as new information is made available practically every day. And we've just added a new category at the very bottom, reopening guidance and best practices. But maybe we should have called it reopening guidance and best practices, we hope, since we're now entering uncharted territory here. I encourage you to explore this portal and share it with your colleagues. And if you find a valuable site that's not listed on this portal, please send it our way. We'd be happy to place it where it belongs and share it with others. And with that, here's my contact information.
Thank you very much, Lori.
You're welcome.
So next up will be Cliff Landis. If you're ready, Cliff, go ahead.
Great. Are y'all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm assuming you can hear my voice because you said yes. So, hi everybody, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very honored to be able to present on the project that Christine and I have been working on over the last year. So very quickly, I'll give my elevator speech about this Gantt project. So the goal is to create a publicly editable directory of Georgia's natural, cultural, and historic organizations by inputting that data into Wikidata. And so this is going to allow for a quick retrieval of location and contact information for disaster response. We're going to make this possible by developing a website using custom queries. So that's the very fast high-end overview, but let me give you a little bit of background information for context. So I'm the Digital Initiatives Librarian at the AUC Woodruff Library. We're the lead organization for this project. The library supports the teaching, learning, and research missions of 4 institutions of higher education that comprise the world's largest consortium of HBCUs: Clark Atlanta University, the Interdenominational Theological Center, Morehouse College, and Spelman College. And I also have to give a shout out to Lyrasis for funding this project through a Lyrasis Catalyst grant. So if you want to apply, those are usually at the beginning of the year. And our project team consists of Christine Wiseman and myself as the co-principal investigators, and the Lyrasis grant funded our graduate student, Allison Smith, and our contract web developer, Matthew Stevens. And team members Jessica Lemming and Alex Dade from Digital Services Department at the AUC Woodruff Library are both pitching in to build this tool as well. So we're partnering with professional and governmental organizations across the state of Georgia and in the southeastern United States. Some of our partners provide assistance to NCH organizations impacted by disasters, including HERA, as well as SHARE, the Savannah Heritage Emergency Response, and GEMA, the Georgia Emergency Management and Homeland Security Agency. And you'll notice all of these little Q numbers next to each of these agencies and organizations, and those will become important in just a minute. So why do we need this tool? Well, as Lori said, natural disasters are impacting Georgia at an alarming rate. And in the past 2 years, Georgia has experienced multiple months of flooding rainfall, a major tornado outbreak, and hurricanes Michael and Dorian. A tool such as this would aid statewide efforts if our partner organizations could access a list of NCH organizations before and after a disaster strikes. And so this map probably looks a little bit familiar, but this is the Hurricane Dorian event map used by FEMA to track NCH organizations in the path of the hurricane. We shared what data we had with FEMA from our coastal counties, so you can see that data is being used in real time for emergency response. So how do these emergency responders find these NCH organizations impacted by disasters? Well, directory information is out there on the web, but it's scattered in different data sets none of which are publicly editable or up to date. And so this whole project started with the Georgia, it's GRAC, it's the Georgia Historic Records Advisory Commission. I get it wrong every time. But it started with their Historical and Cultural Organizations Directory. And then we built from there, adding the Georgia Historical Society's Directory of Affiliate Organizations and the Georgia Association of Museums and Galleries Directory and the Georgia Public Library Service Directory and several other directories with an estimate of over 1,500 organizational records. We know that there's going to be some overlap between these directories, but we won't know exactly how much until we're done. And so we're operating with all of this using Wikidata. Wikidata is a free and open knowledge base that acts as a central storage for the structured data of Wikimedia and its sister projects. So when we were planning this project, we started searching for all of the GLAM organizations, that's galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, in Georgia that have coordinate information, which only pulled up about 40 institutions. But then we broadened our search to look at GLAMs in the United States, and then you get more results than in Georgia. And this has to do with how the information is tagged. If I go back to the previous slide and move forward again, you can see the difference that there's actually more organizations in Georgia than were originally listed. But again, it has to do with how that information is tagged. And that was the type of data that we were planning on cleaning up and editing. Additionally, we were also doing this project to find smaller hidden institutions such as the Georgia Rural Telephone Museum located in Leslie, Georgia. And even though there's an entry in Wikipedia, we didn't have this institution on any of our partners' data sets because there's a lot of these smaller cultural heritage institutions that just go missing. And so we've made quite a bit of progress over the last 10 months. As of now, we have over 1,800 organizations in our index. And as you can see here, this is the list of cultural institutions in Georgia that have coordinate information on their records as of right now. Being able to export contact information in a table format will help emergency responders reach out to these NCH organizations to see if they need assistance before and after a disaster strikes. And this is an example of cultural institutions in, is that DeKalb County? Yes, that's right, DeKalb County as of beginning of this month. So that's 117 institutions. But not all of the data that's needed during an emergency fits into Wikidata. So Wikidata is based around publicly available and publicly verifiable facts. But some things that are important during a disaster don't respond or don't fit inside of that criteria. So on the right, you see the sort of things that GMA would like to have for the web EOC, that's their emergency operations command, that don't fit into Wikidata. So things like collection description, which is more like a free text field, unpublished personally identifiable information. So things like contact names and individual email addresses that would be helpful in a disaster, but that aren't always published on publicly visible websites. Cell phone numbers. So GMA would like to have 4 cell phone numbers as multiple ways to reach out to organizations after hours during a disaster, but that's way out of scope for Wikidata. Floor plans are very helpful for emergency responders, but a security risk to publish non-public areas of buildings online. And of course, hazardous materials on site. Again, helpful for emergency responders, but a potential security risk otherwise. And so again, that's the background information on the project, but how are we actually doing all of this? So first, we start by scraping websites, gathering lists from partners, and creating giant spreadsheets of NCH organizations. We then use free website tools to enrich that data with things like coordinate location and county. Next, we load each of the spreadsheets into OpenRefine and begin matching up organizations to their records in Wikidata. Then we reconcile our fields against Wikidata's schema inside of OpenRefine. Next, we create references for each linked data triple. So for every single fact that we upload to Wikidata, we supply 3 values: the fact itself, the reference URL, and the retrieval date. We're using the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine to take snapshots of each of the web pages where we found each fact. And that's in order to show our work. By citing our sources with snapshots and timestamps, we'll give folks in the future the ability to trace and update each fact as things change over time, such as if a library changes its name, or if it keeps its name but changes its location, each of those will be able to be traced. And so this allows us to track which organizations have dissolved, which also allows us to exclude dissolved organizations from our search results. Then we upload the information to Wikidata. This slide shows the Aragon Historical Society, which we added as part of the testing phase. After the data is uploaded to Wikidata, we perform quality control on each entry to verify that things are correct, particularly in the location coordinate data. Sometimes getting that coordinate location data is tricky, but we try to place the marker on the building itself, since after a disaster, street signs and other wayfinding markers are often damaged or destroyed. So using a GPS location system, you'll actually be able to find where the building was, even if it was completely destroyed. Lastly, we're building a website with custom queries and maps built in. This is a screenshot of our beta site showing a table of NCHs in Chatham County, Georgia. So this website is being developed in May with a final launch date at the end of June. At the end of this one-year project, we hope to have over 1,500 Georgia NCH organizations in Wikidata, and we're doing pretty good since we're at 1,800 right now, I think. And a single location on the web for emergency responders to identify organizations in affected areas. We have a plan for sustainability so that the data continues to be useful. And we hope that this project will serve as a model for other states. To make sure that everything associated with the project is free, transparent, and reproducible, we've created a GitHub repository which includes everything associated with the project. So we're posting all of our code and all of our documentation so the project can be easily replicated. An example of this is our workflow manual shown here, which walks you through the entire process we've developed step by step. The only code that we're not releasing publicly is the final website, and that's for the security of UGA's servers. And by the end of this project in June of 2020, we're going to hand off the project to our state level partner organizations for long-term maintenance and sustainability. So HERA and GMA will integrate the final project into their workflows, and Galileo will take over the website hosting. And Galileo and Georgia Home Place together will take over the annual update schedule to make sure that the organizational records and Wikidata stay up to date. And I want to make sure that we leave enough time for Angela. So with that, I am going to stop my screen sharing and hand it on over. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Cliff. All right. Let's see if we can make this happen. Okay, and I'm assuming y'all can see my slides? Great. All right, well, Todd and Christine, thank you all so much for having me. My presentation today is going to be a bit different than the content you've heard about up to this point, but we're going to dive right in. So again, my name is Angela Stanley, and I'm director of Georgia Home Place, which is a program of the Georgia Public Library Service. Today, I'm going to talk about 2 sets of disaster preparedness and response resources that we provided and continue to provide to Georgia's public libraries. And I'm broadly going to refer to these response resources as the before times and now. But first, I want to give you a little context for Georgia's public library landscape. So if you're unfamiliar with GPLS, we're Georgia's state library, and we're part of the Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia. We administer services and resources to Georgia's 62 public library systems, including the Pines ILS, GLASS, our Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, and our robust statewide partnerships programs, among many other services. My department, Georgia Home Place, supports public libraries as they manage their archival, local history, and special collections. This includes democratizing access to digitization technologies and cultural heritage content, providing consultations for collections management, and working with libraries to better equip them for emergencies. As you can see from the slide on your screen, Georgia has 408 library locations across the 62 systems I mentioned, which means at least one library in each of our 159 counties. We're very proud to report that over 4.3 million Georgians own library cards, and this data is as of fiscal year 19, the most recent data we have right now. Support for technology in libraries is a key aspect of how GPLS combats the digital divide. All of our public libraries offer free internet access, and most at over 100 gigs per second. With over 10 million computer sessions and 36 million checkouts, Georgia's public libraries continue to be vital community lifelines. So I told you I would talk about the specific ways that GPLS and HomePlace built up support for libraries to develop their emergency preparedness and disaster response plans. So now I'll tell you about what initiatives we had underway before COVID-19 hit. In February 2019, I teamed up with Nate Rawl, our Director of Planning and Construction, to offer a free 3-day, 2-track Facilities and Disaster Preparedness Summit. The event was held at Unicoi State Park and featured 24 speakers and 100 attendees. The disaster preparedness track consisted of 12 individual sessions taught by some of Georgia's most esteemed heritage emergency responders, conservators, archivists, and public relations experts. The goal of the event was for all participants to leave with a draft of a disaster preparedness plan for their library. Overall survey responses to the event were very positive. I'll read just a couple of comments. One person said, "I really enjoyed the disaster track of presentations. I thought the information was useful and relevant. Quite a bit of it was information that could be used by any size library, which was a nice change. Usually these presentations are aimed at larger, wealthier systems." And someone else said, "I enjoyed the collection salvage and recovery session. I liked it the most because there was a visual of what can happen to your library in times of disaster and that there are resources available to help." Some activities and sessions that were requested for next time included more sample emergency plans, more staff safety training, including the use of PPE, and a session on how to handle popular circulating collections in addition to handling special materials. The full impact assessment can be found at the link on your screen, and event materials are still downloadable at georgialibraries.org/FACSUM19. Oh, there we go. A few months after the Facilities Summit, we held a webinar with state meteorologist Will Langston called "Georgia's Weather, a Year in Review and What to Expect This Hurricane Season." Holding this webinar, in addition to the content taught at the FACSUM, served a few purposes. It allowed us an opportunity to remind libraries and archives that weather-related emergencies are on the rise, and thus they should have plans in place now. It allowed Will to speak directly to the libraries where he was unavailable during the summit itself, and it allowed us to increase the reach of the content since attendance was open for free to anyone. We also collected supplies to create 2 sample emergency preparedness supply kits that will circulate to libraries. Kits are contained in large black nylon duffel bags with suitcase-style handles and wheels, and contents were added based on recommendations from a variety of cultural heritage emergency response lists. These kits are complete and will be made available to libraries via the statewide courier following the lifting of restrictions on circulating materials. As you can see, up to this point, our efforts really centered around weather-related emergencies. The planning team had multiple conversations about including other types of emergencies, such as active shooters and other human threats, but we ultimately decided to remain collections focused. We never could have imagined the kind of emergency that was in store for us. So, now that our entire world has been turned upside down, how have Georgia's public libraries been responding to COVID-19? So GPLS maintains a coronavirus updates page on its website that lists the operations of all library systems. Currently, all libraries are closed to the public, though just yesterday, several systems began offering curbside pickup of in-house holds. GLAS Atlanta continues to be closed, but is accepting telephone inquiries to troubleshoot BARD and BARD Mobile and is beginning to ramp up its service. The vast majority of libraries are offering virtual programming of all stripes. A listing of those programs is available at the URL on your screen. With public schools closed and many people working from home, the digital divide quickly became more evident than ever. In response, many libraries either left on or expanded their Wi-Fi coverage. This map shows where Georgia residents can get access to free public Wi-Fi. They simply need to pull up to the library's parking lot, stay in their car, and access the signal on their laptop or mobile device. Social distancing signs are visibly posted. The Georgia Department of Community Affairs also created a Wi-Fi map that includes public libraries and other free Wi-Fi access points. If you do a Google search for Georgia public Wi-Fi locations, that listing will come right up. Beginning this summer, GPLS will provide free access to Beanstack, a virtual summer reading program website, to all of Georgia's public libraries. Beanstack allows summer reading participants to create an online account, keep track of the number of books or the duration of time spent reading, and earn incentives. Public libraries will continue to use the content provided by the collaborative summer library program in tandem with Beanstack. Many libraries have already replaced their in-person summer reading programs with digital surrogates. The pandemic has had the effect of hastening several projects that have been in the works for some time. One such project is enabling online library card registration for all public libraries. Using the library vendor Quipu, which runs library card applications against public information databases to confirm residency and eligibility, all libraries will soon be able to offer online card registration to their patrons. GPLS is also rolling out broad implementation of a Pines student library card. Piloted for the last year, this program will enable K-12 students in participating areas to seamlessly register for a Pines library card. Library and local partnering school districts will work together to connect a student's directory data to the Pines database, ensuring privacy, FERPA compliance, and ease of access for all of Georgia's student learners. Finally, as many of you will no doubt be aware, many of Georgia's GLAM institutions are working to document this unprecedented time in our nation's history through the collection of user-submitted photographs, videos, documents, and ephemera. GPLS has created a page listing many of the state's active projects, including 3 public libraries, the Athens-Clarke County Library, the Augusta-Richmond County Library, and the Middle Georgia Regional Library. Resources for libraries wishing to start their own community documentation collections are also available, including a link to Friday's webinar and recording for May Day, How Georgia's Archives and Libraries Are Documenting the COVID-19 Pandemic. Georgia's libraries have responded adeptly to the challenges posed by the novel coronavirus, and many are now exploring what plans for reopening will look like. Many of these plans include a phased transition based on gating criteria established by the federal government, but are contingent upon the successful acquisition of personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies for library staff. Thanks to cost savings realized by a reduction in travel, open positions, and certain scaled back services, GPLS was able to provide every library system with a small pool of funds with which to purchase PPE, cleaning agents, and other pandemic response supplies. Libraries are also creating workflows for the quarantine of returned materials according to best practices established by IMLS, ALA, NEDCC, the Smithsonian, and other library leaders in consultation with CDC epidemiologists. As services ramp up, libraries may continue to offer curbside service or begin to allow a small number of library visitors into the building at a time. Some libraries have discussed the possibility of limited stack access reduced seating to ensure appropriate distancing, continuing to restrict or limit in-person programming, and offering special hours for at-risk populations. As reopening plans emerge, libraries continue to be generous in sharing information, strategies, and plans. Some have already begun to fold pandemic response plans into their general emergency response plans, while others will evaluate the effectiveness of their decisions at a later point. So what are the takeaways? Although I don't have data to back this up, it is my sincerely held belief that because Georgia's libraries were already thinking about disaster response, albeit in an entirely different context, that many libraries were able to apply existing tools and strategies to this new environment. Topics like crisis communications and cultivating local response networks are universally relevant. GPLS has also invested heavily in library leadership development, and I think we've seen a tremendous return on that. Georgia's public libraries have managed to pivot quickly to provide incredible digital content, support digital access through Wi-Fi hotspots and device lending programs, advocate for community counts during this crucial census year, and perform essential functions as polling locations. We've all been asked to absorb, synthesize, and act upon a vast amount of information incredibly quickly, and I am forever in awe of libraries' ability to adapt. Will we include pandemic planning at our next summit? You bet. But I couldn't be more proud of or less surprised by our library's response. If you would like to get in touch, my contact information is available on your screen. And with that, I will hand it back over to Todd.
Thank you very much, Angela. So this concludes the presentation from our panelists. If you have additional questions for them, if you want to go ahead and put those in the Q&A panel, then I will hit our panelists with those questions. Thus far, we have had a request to share presentations. Initially, the request was for Lori's, but I would ask all of you if you would be willing to do so. I think the attendees would appreciate it. And I will, as soon as we know exactly how we're going to host those, we will make sure that we get the word out via social media channels or HERA's listserv. And I mentioned it in my response in the Q&A box, but the intention is for the program to go up on YouTube as well. So we will get that out as soon as we can. Any other questions?
It looks like in the chat box, Nicole mentioned that there's going to be a webinar from the Texas Digital Library on reopening happening soon for those that are interested. So you can find that in the chat box.
I see that now. Thank you. Any further thoughts from our panelists?
It looks like Anna's asking if we'll make an announcement when the Gantt database becomes available. And yes, all the data is in Wikidata now. But so please go and check out your own organizations to make sure that they're in there and well described, and I didn't miss anything during QC. But otherwise, yes, we're going to be doing a lot of press in order to announce once the site becomes available to everyone to use.
Any last questions? Oh, here's another one. Question for Angela. Do you see this one, Angela? In the Q&A, were there any barriers for collecting materials about the COVID, such as hoops you had to jump through?
Were there any barriers for collecting materials about COVID-19 hoops you had to jump through? I'm assuming that we're talking to, IRB or privacy concerns, et cetera. So to clarify, GPLS is not a collecting institution. We are not doing the collection of materials, but we are trying to highlight the efforts of libraries and archives around the state that are doing that work. I know that in the webinar, we did address, at least with the 4 institutions that we had represented, the various privacy concerns, concerns about health information, personally identifiable information, and the different layers of vetting that materials are going through as they are received. But I do want to clarify that just because libraries are collecting this information does not mean that it's necessarily going to be immediately published to the internet. And so a lot of this stuff will probably remain inaccessible for some time. But I know everyone's handling it a little bit differently, but most are requiring some kind of donor deed of gift or sort of digital release of rights or licensing on those materials that they provide for those collections.
And then Angela, we just had pop up in the chat. You see that one? I missed how you provide the free Wi-Fi for patrons. Can you restate that? Thank you.
Oh, public libraries around Georgia have all been able to, are already providing free Wi-Fi to the public. And some of them on the map you'll see do require like a library card to be able to access the Wi-Fi. The vast majority of public libraries do not require any kind of authentication. You can just jump on the free Wi-Fi. I know that, and this is not my area of expertise, but I know that several libraries have looked at different sort of technological infrastructure that can help to strengthen and broaden the reach of the signal so it covers more geographical area. If that's something that you have questions about, I would be glad to talk to you after this offline and connect you with the person to speak to at GPLS.
And then in the chat box, we've had a referral to the webinar from the Texas Digital Library on reopening. So take a look at that in the chat box. So I have a question for Cliff. I mean, on the museum side, I know that the vast majority, I don't know that this is the case statistically in Georgia, but in the US, I've often heard that the vast majority of museums / historical societies are places either with no professional staff, i.e. all volunteer staffing, or perhaps if they're lucky and especially flush with cash, they might have one permanent staff member. How do you go about reaching out to folks where there may not be a person to reach out to specifically in order to gather their data?
Sure. So that's a great question. Because of the way that Wikidata works, in that you have to be able to prove a reference for every fact that you list, we're basing the vast majority of the work that we do off of websites. And so we'll just gather the publicly available directory information, which includes things like phone numbers, email addresses, websites, Facebook ID, Twitter ID, that sort of stuff. We don't actually end up having to call people or contact people individually for most of the circumstances. There are some cases where we want to verify information, and in those cases we might reach out to them, and then we actually have a source notes field in our giant spreadsheet. So if we call somebody and they say, oh yeah, that historical organization was run by my husband, he's dead, he's been dead for 10 years, that thing's defunct, then that's our source. And so we actually put that into our spreadsheet, and then we can use that spreadsheet as the reference to say this was verified by phone that the organization was dissolved in 2010 or whatever. So that's how we've been doing the checking. But Yeah, and in most cases, we try to keep it as up to date as we can, but we don't assume that everything that we have is 100% correct. But again, that's where when an emergency responder organization is responding to a disaster, they can always reach out and they might find some new information in the process.
It makes sense. Any last questions?
Todd, I do see the question about, have there been any conversations of a potential physical reopening of any of Georgia public libraries? Yes, there has been so much conversation around that. There are, as I mentioned in the presentation, many libraries are following the gating criteria set up by the White House. They've also created sort of an internal reference documentation that kind of synthesizes best practices and recommendations for, again, ramping up service. I do believe that most, if not all, libraries are going to be considering like I said, a phased return to services. So right now they're looking at staff coming back in the building, maybe doing curbside pickup, or offering limited services. Maybe the next thing will look like controlled access to the building by patrons with an eventual physical reopening. But for the most part, dates for those, sort of like we're back in business, regular hours, anybody can come in, those dates are not available yet. I think everybody is still very much kind of waiting and seeing and wanting to do what is best, understanding that public libraries, interact with anybody who walks in the front door. Those materials have been now in people's homes for quite some time because they asked them to hang on to them for a while. So there are a lot of concerns for both staff and public safety.
Hey everyone, this is Christine. Thanks for these great presentations. I wanted to put a quick plug in for our project in Georgia. We are going to be speaking at the SAA conference, which has just gone online. Many of you probably heard. So if you're coming to SAA virtually, please tune in to our session. Lori is also going to be on that session, as is Caitlin Averett from the Smithsonian. So we'll have an update in August with where we are in the project. We should be wrapping up by then, and we should have the website ready. Also, we had a couple of other promotional events planned that were all canceled, unfortunately, due to the current situation. But we are going to try to still take this kind of event on the road, so to speak, next year. So if there are other programs that you're involved in around Georgia or even beyond, we're definitely available to speak to help promote and spread the word about the project.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you to all of our panelists and attendees. Until next time.